Welcome back, everybody, to the NCAA Next Up Dynasty here on NCAA Football 14. Today we'll be getting through weeks 4, 5, and 6 here in season number 4 of the series. In the last episode, we kicked off the season going through the first 3 weeks. It's hard to make conclusions on the season through the opening few weeks, but it was a pretty exciting start. We had some very interesting results. We had some surprising upsets. Some teams look really good, some teams not so much. You've got schools like South Alabama and Penn State who apparently have completely forgotten how to play football. And you have other teams like Oklahoma who just beat Ohio State in week 2 in a national championship rematch. The Sooners beat Florida in week 3. You've also got teams like Oregon who beat Clemson on the road in week 2 just to lose at home the following week to Western Kentucky. So it has been a totally wild season up to this point. And now that we're getting into the nitty-gritty of some of these in-conference races, I think this season's going to be pretty exciting. The Oklahoma Sooners are currently the number 1 team. They opened up the season ranked number 10. So that kind of puts into perspective how much movement there has been in these polls. We've had 3 separate number 1 teams already, with Georgia, who lost last week, Florida, who also lost last week, and now Oklahoma. We've got teams moving in and out. So to put it nicely, this season has been absolutely wild. The Heisman race has also flipped on its side from what we expected in the preseason. While Puma Whitlock is still in first place, everything else has changed, with Troy Davenport skyrocketing up the Heisman list. The Alabama quarterback has gotten off to a fantastic start so far on the year. Let's take a look at the schedule here for the next 3 weeks. And as I said just a moment ago, we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of these in-conference races. Got some big games here in week 4, Texas and Alabama. That's going to be a very interesting matchup in Tuscaloosa. Can Troy Davenport keep his hot start to the season going? Wisconsin, USC, Middle Tennessee State, Florida State. I'm really curious to see how Middle Tennessee State does. They play against Clemson in week 5, so they're getting battle-tested quickly here in the ACC. Oregon plays against USC, FSU facing off against North Carolina, and then week 6, Iowa versus Ohio State, Tennessee versus Georgia. Tennessee also plays against Florida in week 5, Miami versus Clemson. Yeah, it is a stacked slate of games, let me tell you. We'll start with the number 1 ranked Oklahoma Sooners, who despite having 3 players get drafted into the top 10 last year and losing more talent than anybody, they are on fire. They've already beaten Ohio State and Florida this year. Today, they start here at home against Ole Miss, one of the cellar dwellers of the SEC. This game ended up being surprisingly competitive. Ole Miss was in it up until the very end, but the Sooners survived what could have been a historic upset as they won this game by just 1 point. 21-20, your final. Oklahoma gets the win. They stay number 1, but a little bit of a scare here in Norman. Oklahoma might have been feeling themselves too much after beating arguably the 2 best teams in the country from a season ago. Deacon Adderley does continue to play well as the Oklahoma quarterback. He's not as good as Romeo Coloci, but he's a very solid player. Wide receiver Aaron Mayer did his best to try to carry Ole Miss with 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, but ultimately it was to no avail. Texas heads to Tuscaloosa to face off against Alabama. The Pick'em seems to side with the Tide, who are getting over 3/4 of the votes. This is a huge game for both teams inside the SEC West. There's not much margin for error, as that seems like by far the better division in the SEC. This game ended up going down to the wire. Troy Davenport looked really good in the first half again for Alabama, but he was a little bit inefficient as this game went along before he got banged up in the second half. As for Texas, their junior quarterback, Onyx St. James, had another pretty good performance. This matchup ended up going down to the wire, but a late rushing touchdown from Onyx St. James would propel Texas to the upset over Alabama, 40-38. What a big win for Texas. Maybe the biggest win they've had in this entire series so far. It really feels like the Longhorns have turned a corner from the first couple of seasons where they were disappointing. Last year they took a step up, and I think they're taking another step up this year. Onyx St. James is not the most accurate, but he makes big throws, and he doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot, which is certainly a big deal. Number 8, Georgia heads to LSU, the Bayou, to face off against the 0-3 LSU Tigers, who are on to their 3rd head coach in the last 4 years. LSU's football program has taken a massive downswing since winning the national championship with Joe Burrow. Georgia's coming off a loss last week, so they've got to win this game. They're doing all these fancy plays like this flea flicker rushing touchdown for Rufus Motley. But LSU stayed in this game the entire way. Their quarterback, Otto Askew, is a dog. Even though LSU is not that great of a team, Askew's dominance was able to lead LSU to the upset win here at home against the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia, the preseason #1 team, has now lost 2 in a row, and they have fallen all the way to 22. Meanwhile, the Tigers win their first game of the year with 5 touchdown passes from Otto Askew, who had a phenomenal performance. If he was on a good team, man, he'd be getting legitimate Heisman consideration. He is a total stud, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. As for Georgia, Rufus Motley, much of the same. Very inefficient as a passer, but he made some big throws, and he was good on the ground. He's got to be more protective and accurate with the football, though. Florida heads down to Rocky Top to face off against the Tennessee Volunteers. This is a big opportunity here for Tennessee to try to really cement themselves as a contender in the SEC. Florida lost last week. They're looking to get back on track, but it would be all Tennessee early. Roddy Jolly, the quarterback, ran for 2 touchdowns, including this ridiculous play to put Tennessee up 27-10 in the 4th quarter. There's one problem about Tennessee football. Right when they make something happen, they just shoot themselves in the foot, and that is exactly what they did today. In the final 10 minutes, Florida outscored Tennessee 21-0, and the Gators would come back and survive the upset attempt, 31-27 being your final, with a late touchdown here from Deontay Harris over to Foreman. A big win here for the Gators to get back on track after a loss last week and nearly losing again this week. There's just something about this Tennessee program. Whenever they either get a big win or they look like they're about to get a big win, they just find ways to screw it up, and that's what they did today. Tennessee's still 2-1. They're still a good team, but man, this one really stings for the Vols. All the early season, the momentum they had, gone. Number 4 USC has looked a little bit vulnerable this year, but it's been so far so good. They're facing off against a tough Wisconsin team who is currently number 25. This game ended up being a really good one as well. Edwin Dancer, the 7th, had a really solid game for Wisconsin, but the Trojans were able to fight on and avoid the upset with a late touchdown from sophomore quarterback Amari August over to his tight end, Squeezy Pryor-Escobar, the cousin of Titans wide receiver Hot Rod Pryor. Good win here for USC at home against a pretty good Wisconsin team who was 3-0 and ranked. It's been an up-and-down experience so far for Amari August. He's made some good plays and has shown a lot of flashes, but he hasn't been all that efficient. This is USC's tied for highest ranking of the series, tied with last year in the college football playoff when they were the number 3 seed and got obliterated in the Rose Bowl by Ohio State. This is Middle Tennessee State's first ACC game, and it seems like the public is decently confident in them, despite the fact they're facing off against a really good Florida State team on the road. Florida State had to humble these guys. Middle Tennessee State may have been a great program over the last 3 years, but they're new to the Power 5, and it showed. Florida State had a phenomenal game here. Ahmed Okado, the first-year starter at quarterback, has needed no time to adjust. As the Seminoles win 41-21, they move up in the polls. I think Middle Tennessee State could be a team who ends up disappointing this year. I think they'll still make a bowl game, but I think it's going to take them a little while to really get used to Power 5 competition. As for Florida State, their running back Jay Sean Tate is a total stud. Could this be the year that Florida State finally becomes a great team? Over the last 3 years, they've been really good each season, but they haven't been able to get over the hump. Baylor heads down to Auburn to face off against the 22nd ranked Auburn Tigers. Baylor currently sits at number 10 in the nation. This is a big non-conference matchup and an opportunity for the Big 12 to show what they're made of against a good SEC team. I will say, Auburn was able to stop Dontavius Brown. This is actually the backup running back, Moises Barrios, who scored twice. However, it was Auburn who was able to get the win here with a late touchdown from running back Gaffey Quentin, as the Tigers would get the win, 31-26. Look at this play again. Gaffey Quentin flips over the defender. Good win for Auburn, who moves up to 17. I don't really see the argument of them being lower than Baylor, but they are. Shout out to Gaffey Quentin, 111 yards and 2 touchdowns for the sophomore, 6.9 yards a carry. Nice. If you can stop Dontavius Brown, you can beat Baylor, and Brown had maybe the worst game of his career, which more so speaks to how dominant he's been. The final game we'll go over today is Idaho and Arizona. Idaho's quarterback Kylan Cortland will be out for the next 7 weeks. That's a really big deal. This is a pass-first offense. Cortland is a new starter to the position, but he looked really good through his first couple of weeks. Sophomore Jarquez Patrick will be the new starter for the Vandals. Patrick was able to pick up right where Kylan Cortland left off. Arizona gave Idaho a tough battle, but the Vandals would continue to prove why they're going to be a big force in the Pac-12 as they won this game 28-21. We've seen some Group 5 teams move up to Power 5, and it's been a tough adjustment for them. But Idaho has really flourished so far in the Pac-12, albeit it's early. But I think they're going to keep it going as long as Jarquez Patrick plays good football. He only completed 35% of his passes, but he did throw for 3 touchdowns. If he can be more efficient as a passer, I think Idaho could be one of the 2 to 3 best teams in the Pac-12. As for Arizona, their offense and defense both played solid, but not well enough to get the win. Let's take a look at some other scores as Minnesota is now ranked. They beat Ohio. South Carolina, 4-0, really adjusting well in the Fun Belt as they are now ranked 19. Navy, Ohio State, Oregon, UNC, and Iowa all take care of business. Some of these games ended up being a little bit close, though. Oregon and UNC only beating their teams by 17. Michigan State only beats Western Michigan by 10. Clemson takes care of business, as does Cal. Notre Dame wins as well. And then looking at the rest of the country, taking a look at some of the other scores. Buffalo wins their first game of the year, beating Boise State. UCF drops 70 on Oregon State. That's a lot. Hawaii with a nice win. UAB with a nice win. Kentucky defeats Arkansas. The Razorbacks are still winless on the season, I believe. Missouri with a good win. Houston loses to Colorado State 34-6. Remember when Houston was in the playoff? That was just 2 years ago. South Alabama is now 0-3 as they fall to USF. Pretty rough season for the Jaguars. It doesn't look like they're going to be contending for anything this year. And then taking a look at some of the scores on the bottom. Good win for TCU. Good win for Cincinnati. Boston College beats Utah. Boston College has not won a lot of games over the last couple of years, so they'll take anything they can get. Let's take a look at the polls now. We've got some movement with the number 2 team, Alabama, losing. They dropped to 7. Everybody else moves up a spot because of it, with 5 different teams getting votes for number 1. Looking at some other big movers, Baylor drops down 4, Auburn goes up 5, Tennessee drops 4, as does Middle Tennessee State, while Georgia goes down by 14. Michigan State, Washington, and Minnesota are now ranked. Arizona, Pitt, and Wisconsin are out. Pitt's quarterback suffered a season-ending injury. Oregon's quarterback, Stanley Cubbage Jr., also suffered a season-ending injury this week. Troy Davenport has passed Puma Whitlock for number 1 in the Heisman despite losing to Onyx St. James, who is now in 2nd. Puma's in 3rd, with Tyshawn Bankston and Rufus Motley in 4th and 5th. Why Motley is on the list, I don't know. He has been mostly a disappointment, in my opinion, this year. Let's take a look at the players of the week. Ryan McKenzie, a corner for Temple, and then Nolan Mitchell II for UCF. He scored 6 touchdowns, helping the Knights drop 70 against Oregon State. As I mentioned with the quarterbacks, we've gotten plenty of injuries at that position. Oregon, Pitt, Idaho, just to name a few. TCU's quarterback is out for a little bit as well. And then they're not the only ones. Arkansas running back Jade Sky is out for the year too. He was off to a great start. But let's move on and take a look at Week 5. Got some really good games here. Iowa, Michigan State's fun. Clemson, Middle Tennessee State. I want to see if the Blue Raiders can bounce back. Oregon, USC. Cal, Arizona. Florida, North Carolina. We'll see what the Tar Heels are made of against a great FSU team. But we'll start here in South Florida. Number 13, Miami's gotten off to a pretty good start this year. They'll face off against their in-state foes, the Golden Panthers of Florida International University. This seemed like an easy win on paper for Miami, but not so fast. I'd like to introduce the Hurricane defense to senior quarterback Jimmy Jenkins. Jimmy played really well in this game, leading FIU to a tight victory over the Canes, 45-42. An upset win here for FIU. We'll see if they can keep it going. As for Miami, this gives them a lot less margin for error, and they've obviously got a tough ACC schedule coming up. They play against Clemson next week. That's certainly not easy. Jimmy Jenkins with 369 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was phenomenal in this game for the Golden Panthers. This is a game I'm really intrigued by. You got number 16 Iowa, who hasn't lost yet, against Michigan State, number 23. 2 pretty good teams in the Big Ten. And this game ended up being a thriller. A lot of points in this game. I know, a rarity for Iowa football. This game ended up going down to the wire, and ultimately, this game ended up going into double overtime. Both teams scored a touchdown on their opening possession of overtime. Iowa got the ball next. They kicked a field goal, which was Michigan State's window to win, and they capitalized. Jay Jordan connects with Eric Copeland for the win, 54-51. That might be a higher point differential than the Iowa football program got in real life for the entirety of the season. Jay Jordan is a baller, man. 5 touchdowns, nearly 500 yards. There's a reason why he's the top projected quarterback in this year's draft. Quadell Owens for Iowa had a great performance as well, but he was unable to lead his team to the win. This game ended up being wild. Number 8 Clemson, number 21 Middle Tennessee State. Everybody is rolling with the Blue Raiders, which kind of surprised me a little bit because Clemson's favored. And boy, did Clemson make those people look stupid. Just as Florida State did a week ago, Clemson wanted to humble Middle Tennessee State, give them a real welcome to the ACC. And I think Middle Tennessee State might be having second thoughts about going Power 5. Early in the second quarter, Clemson led this game 20-0, and it did not get better for Middle Tennessee State. Juan Escala St. Lazar would throw a pick six here, making it 27-0. And then something changed. Middle Tennessee State started to click a little bit. The offense made some noise, the defense was making some plays, and eventually this game ended up being really close. Going into the fourth quarter, the Blue Raiders kept the momentum rolling. Not only did they come back down 27-0 to win, but they won by double digits. 43-33 is your final. Welcome to the ACC, Middle Tennessee State. Talk about a statement win for the Blue Raiders. Wow. As for Clemson, they are 2-2. Yes, they've lost to 2 really good teams so far, Oregon and Middle Tennessee State. But still, completing 29% of your passes as an NFL draft prospect is unacceptable, and Clemson does not have a whole lot of margin for error now, being that they've lost 2 games. Number 18, Oregon, heads down to Southern California to face off against USC. The Trojans getting 70% of the pick'em vote. I don't trust USC. There's something that's kind of fraudulent about this team, and I think Oregon, despite being with a backup quarterback now, could beat them. However, Monty Bradley, the USC running back, did everything in his power to make sure that did not happen. Both teams ran the ball really well, with the weather conditions being a problem, and ultimately the game ended up going into overtime, but Monty Bradley's dominance was too much for the Oregon defense to deal with. USC survives the upset bid as they defeat Oregon 41-38. Similarly with Clemson, Oregon does not have a whole lot of margin for error. Now that they already have 2 losses, Oregon did beat Clemson, so who knows, that tiebreaker may eventually be important. As for USC, they're undefeated. They ran the ball phenomenally today. I think Keone Hilary, the new quarterback for Oregon, played pretty solid. Hilary got some snaps last year, and now he's going to have to be the guy this year. Number 6, Notre Dame has gotten off to a really good start this year. They'll be facing off against their rivals, the winless Purdue Boilermakers. It is a rivalry game, and it is rainy, so both of those things really neutralize the conditions, and Purdue took advantage. This game ended up being ridiculously high scoring. I feel like every game this week has either been super high scoring, gone into overtime, or both. This game would fall into the category of both. But ultimately, Notre Dame did survive the upset bid with a rushing touchdown from Baz Boyd, who scored a total of 6 touchdowns today, leading Notre Dame to the victory. I get it's Purdue, but Baz Boyd was phenomenal today, and I really think Baz Boyd has kind of taken a turn in his career. He had a passer rating of 377 today, and this was by far the best game of his career. He won the NCAA Offensive Player of the Week, and I think Boyd has shown legitimate improvement in each of his 3 seasons as a starter. Enough improvement to potentially warrant being an NFL draft pick. Gotta give Purdue credit for making it a game, but unfortunately for them, they are unable to get the win. Number 20, Tennessee, heads to the Bayou to face off against LSU. Another thing about this week, I feel like every game is raining. Today being no exception. Both of these teams are coming off of interesting results last week. Tennessee choked a game they shouldn't have against Florida, while LSU beat a great Georgia team, and the Tigers picked up right where they left off. And I guess you could say Tennessee, with them losing momentum, also picked up where they left off. The Tigers ended up winning 21-17. Could this be the change in the LSU football program, who has been so disappointing the last few years? Could this be a changing of the guard with another very good performance from Otto Askew and another hilarious loss for the Tennessee Volunteers? Tennessee is now 2-2. They are unranked. Roddy Jolly did not play well at all, only completing 39% of his passes and running for 3.3 yards a carry. Number 4, California has gone under the radar so far this year, but it looks like the Golden Bears are really good again. They're facing off against a tough Arizona team in what could be a big matchup within the Pac-12. Both of these teams now are in the same division, with Arizona swapping. Marquise Harris has quietly picked up right where he left off from last year. He replaced Rufus Motley as the starter due to injury. He kept the starting job, and clearly for good reason. Arizona's offense gave Cal a good fight. The Wildcats scored 44 points in this game, but that was not enough to stop the beast that is Cal's offense. Harrison Myers, the senior running back, is one of the best running backs in the country. Cal would win 52-44. The Golden Bears stay undefeated and inside the top 5. Cal looks really smart for picking Marquise Harris as their starting quarterback because he's been really good this year, whereas Rufus Motley at Georgia has not been so good so far. Harris only completed 60% of his passes, which is low for him, but he threw for 3 touchdowns and did not turn the ball over. It's been a disastrous season for South Alabama. They're 0-3. They've been really bad. On the flip side, South Carolina looks really good. They're 4-0. They are the best team in the Fun Belt right now. But the fun thing about the Fun Belt is that these games are fun. So let's have some fun. I know I used fun like 4 times there. Just roll with it. But this game ended up being really competitive. Got to give South Alabama credit for making it a game. And ultimately, it ended up going into overtime. I know. Death, taxes, and overtime games here in Week 5. The Jaguars were able to kick a game-winning field goal to win their first game of the year, 20-17. A nice win here for South Alabama, who needed it. Although the Jaguars have played horribly so far this year, none of their losses were in conference. So if they can figure some things out, then maybe they can make a run here in the Fun Belt. As for South Carolina, I wouldn't really worry about it too much. I still think they are the best Group 5 team right now, but losing this game does give them a little less margin for error. Let's look at this Idaho game. Obviously, we know their quarterback is injured. They've got to have another good performance from Jarquez Patrick as they face off against the Owls of Florida Atlantic. This game ended up being a blowout, but maybe not the blowout that everybody had thought. Florida Atlantic dominated this game, completely steamrolling the Idaho Vandals, winning 34-7. A bad loss for Idaho, and while it's not in conference, I am a little bit concerned. Maybe they are really missing their starting quarterback. Good win for FAU. The Owls are now 2-1 on the season. Jarquez Patrick had a pretty bad game at the helm. As for FAU, their quarterback, Ricks, ended up throwing 4 touchdowns in the win. Got to see how Idaho responds here. They've got some big games in conference coming up, so they've got to really perform in what looks to be a really good Pac-12 this year. FSU, number 2, faces off against the number 12 ranked North Carolina Tar Heels. This is a big test for both teams. Can UNC hang with the big guns? And is Florida State one of the big guns? And we got clear answers to both of those questions. Is Florida State one of the big guns? Hell yes. Can North Carolina hang with the big guns? Not yet. The Seminoles won this game comfortably, 40-14, led by a big performance on the ground from senior running back Jayshawn Tate. Through the first third of the year, Jayshawn Tate has been the Heisman Trophy winner. He has been phenomenal for Florida State on the ground, and it just feels like there's something different about this Seminoles team. Their defense has been phenomenal. Today, no different. On offense, Ahmed Okado has been pretty solid. Not so much today, but it didn't matter because Jayshawn Tate is a total dog. The final game of the day, we've got number 7 Alabama coming off a tough loss against Texas. They're headed down to Oxford, Mississippi to face off against the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss nearly beat number 1 Oklahoma a week ago. This game ended up being not even close, but again, not the way you would have expected. Alabama, needing to respond after a loss, got smacked by the Rebels, 33-13. All of the Heisman hype with Troy Davenport, all of this elite hype with Alabama is out the window. You cannot lose to Ole Miss, who had not won a game up to this point until today. I don't even think Ole Miss played all that well, and they still won by 20. Troy Davenport has reverted back to playing poorly. He was inaccurate. He turned the ball over twice. And Alabama's not even trying to get their running backs involved. Troy Davenport's literally the entire offense, and other teams are catching on. And Alabama might keep losing if they don't get their act together. Looking at some other scores, Baylor, Florida, Michigan take care of business. The Wolverines back in the top 25 after a disappointing season last year. Wisconsin wins, Texas barely wins, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, Washington, Navy, Auburn, Oklahoma, they all take their games. And then looking at all of the games around the country, Stanford with a nice win over Hawaii. Arkansas defeats Texas A&M in overtime, the first win this season for the Razorbacks. UCLA wins for the first time since week 1. Duke wins a game. They beat Houston. I remember when those two teams were good. That was fun. Now they both stink. Iowa State loses to Louisville. Penn State wins the game. They beat Georgia Tech. Nice win for UAB over the University of Connecticut. Memphis is 4-0, albeit some fraudulent wins. Bowling Green gets clobbered by Boise State on the blue turf, 45-21. SMU 4-0. They defeat TCU. Kansas State wins their first game of the year. Vanderbilt wins their first as well, while UCF and Minnesota lose their first games of the season. So as we take a look at the polls, no movement in the top 5, but we do have some teams moving up and around. Baylor jumps back up to 10 after beating just BYU. Clemson goes down 4. Alabama goes down 9. While Michigan and Wisconsin are both ranked now. Tennessee and Minnesota drop out. Let's take a look at your Heisman watch. Troy Davenport is still first. I don't think he should anymore. I think it should be Ja'Sean Tate with Florida State. He's been phenomenal. I also don't get why Puma Whitlock has dropped out of the top 5. He's been really good this year. It's just that Ohio State hasn't really played against anybody other than Oklahoma, who they lost to, but Puma still played really well in that game. Players of the week, Austin Carter on defense, and Baz Boyd with a career game on offense, getting it for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Let's take a look at the Week 6 schedule. Got some more really fun games this week. I'm intrigued by this matchup between Iowa and Ohio State. Iowa gave the Buckeyes a lot of trouble last year, so could we see the same? Tennessee, Georgia, both teams have to win. Oregon and Michigan, those teams always have really fun battles within the Big Ten. LSU and Auburn's kind of interesting. Auburn's really good. The Tigers are hot. Miami, Clemson's an interesting one as well. I'm excited to talk about that one, but we'll start here in Austin. South Alabama finally won a game last week. We'll see if they can keep the good times rolling as they face off against number 7 Texas, who is coming off a close win last week against a measly Syracuse team. Texas stormed out the gates in dominant fashion. They led 17-0, and then they fell apart. It's like a flip has been switched for South Alabama. After losing their first 3 games, they really figured things out. Senior wide receiver Sammy Wusus scored 3 times in this game. Wusus was a contender for the Biletnikoff Award last year, getting second place in the vote. He's been quiet this year until today, where he really showed out. South Alabama wins 31-27. South Alabama is now ranked. I don't agree with that at all. South Alabama got their first win 5 minutes ago, and now they're ranked. And I get they've beaten 2 good teams, and they've been good in the past, but South Alabama's not played well this year. I don't know how they are ranked. As for Texas, they dropped to 17. It's not an in-conference loss, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's still not ideal for the Longhorns. Let's now take a look at the Baylor Bears, who are back inside the top 10 at number 10. They'll be facing off against the Vanderbilt Commodores, who won their first game of the season a week ago against UCF. They're trying to keep the momentum rolling for themselves, and that they would. Vanderbilt's a really talented team. They just really haven't been able to put the pieces together in the Big 12, but they've now beaten 2 good teams in a row. UCF has gotten off to a great start this year, and obviously Baylor is quite good as well, but the Commodores would win 38-26. Not a great episode for Baylor. They lose 2 games. They're now the 22nd ranked team in the country. I'm not so sure they're the favorites now in the Big 12. Dontavius Brown played really well in this game, 220 yards and 2 touchdowns, but sometimes he can't just carry the team on his own. That's what he's been doing for the last 2.5 years. Today it didn't work out. Number 18 Iowa heads to the shoe to face off against number 9 Ohio State. The Buckeyes have looked good since their Week 2 loss against Oklahoma, but this is by far the toughest game on their schedule since then. I was expecting Iowa to give them a game, and I was wrong. Ohio State was very clearly the better team from start to finish. Puma Whitlock reminded everybody that he is still the guy to beat for the Heisman Trophy. Ohio State ended up getting the win 48-28. Iowa looked really good to start the year. They've lost 2 games in a row. I still think they're a good team, I mean, they lost to Michigan State and Ohio State on the road, so I get it. But it doesn't look like Iowa will be a sleeper contender in the Big Ten West this year. Rather, they're just going to have another 8 or 9 win season and get a decent bowl game. 5 touchdowns for Puma Whitlock, 2 for Mookie Davis. I still think Ohio State is the team to beat this year in college football, and they're playing really well since their opening loss. Number 8, Virginia Tech has flown under the radar, but they have played well this year. There's one problem, though. Their quarterback, DeAndre Jones, is injured and is expected to miss quite a bit of time. It seems like half the country has their starting quarterback hurt. It was noticeable today because NC State gave him a ball game, but Virginia Tech would survive 34-31. The Hokey Pokeys would move all the way up to number 5. Hint, hint, stuff goes down at the top of the polls this week, so buckle up. The freshman, Jackson Masters, completed 71% of his passes, but half of his incompletions were interceptions. He's going to need to play well if DeAndre Jones missing the next 7 weeks due to a broken tailbone. Tennessee heads to Georgia to face off against the number 19 Bulldogs. This is a must-win game for both teams. Tennessee has lost 2 in a row. Georgia has 2 losses as well. Neither team can afford to lose again, or else their season could fall in the toilet. Georgia looked pretty good early in this game. Rufus Motley played better as a passer, but it ultimately was Tennessee who ended up getting the win here, 31-17, with a much better performance this week from Roddy Jolly. The Georgia Bulldogs are now 2-3. They have lost 3 games in a row, and quite frankly, they look like a bad football team right now. Georgia was the number 1 team in the preseason poll. Here we are at the end of week 6. The Bulldogs are now unranked, as they should be. This is a team who should be competing for the college football playoff, and they have been throughout the entirety of the series, but this might not be their year. They got Rufus Motley, the graduate transfer, and it seems like this pairing has just completely fallen flat on their faces. Good win here for Tennessee. They still have a lot of questions to answer, but this was a much-needed bounce-back victory after 2 pretty back-to-back embarrassing losses. Number 20, Oregon is 2-2. This would be a big win for them here on the road here at Michigan, facing off against the number 23 ranked Wolverines, who are 4-0. They're playing some good football after a bad season last year. Whenever these 2 teams play, it always ends up being a really exciting game, and today ended up being no different. These are 2 really, really good teams within the Big Ten Conference. It ultimately went back and forth. Keone Hilari, the new starting quarterback for Oregon, played pretty well, giving Duck fans confidence in him being the starter the rest of the year. Casey Aceron, the Michigan running back, produced, but it was Oregon who ended up getting the win here, 48-38, with this big touchdown run by Mason Tartle as he dove into the end zone. His leg literally, snapped, and he, jumped out of the flip. Let's look at this again. Dear God, he was literally doing a flip and then just decided not to halfway through. In slow motion, look at his leg. Oh my God! Did he just break his leg? Well, apparently he's fine, but it sure doesn't look like it. Oh dear, I'm about to throw up. So, Oregon wins 48-38, despite their running back nearly snapping his leg. Callaghan October was solid, so was Casey Aceron, but Michigan was unable to get the win. I still feel pretty good about the Wolverines so far. They're 4-1. They should be ranked, in my opinion. I think this is just because they had one really bad year, but other than that, they've been good. This is a game I'm quietly intrigued by. Auburn looks really good, while LSU, despite being under 500, is one of the hottest teams in the country. Both teams ended up playing really well today, but LSU's momentum and their Cinderella streak over the last couple of weeks would not continue. The clock strikes midnight. Auburn wins 34-31. The Tigers are 5-0. They are now number 7 in the country. They started the season unranked. They started today's episode 22, and now they are 7th. That just kind of tells you how crazy the college football season has been, and we're going to see some more surprising results this week. So again, buckle up. Miami facing off against Clemson. Both teams with embarrassing losses last week. Miami got upset by FIU. Clemson choked a 27-0 lead. So both teams need a win here pretty badly. And this game ended up being really competitive for the most part. Both teams looked like they really wanted it. They each ran the ball well. But it ultimately came down to which team has more talent. And that is the Clemson Tigers. A much-needed win here for Clemson. They take this one 27-20 with a big run here by the young freshman running back Jet Adams, who is the starter after their main starter got hurt. Again, injuries continue to be one of the big stories of this season. Adams with 94 yards and 2 touchdowns, leading the Clemson offense to victory. The Tigers are nearly in the top 10. They are number 11, despite having 2 losses. Alabama has been embarrassing the last couple of weeks. They lost to Texas, they lost to Ole Miss, and Troy Davenport has not played well at all. But they're playing San Jose State today. This should be a pretty easy win for them. Hint, it was not. San Jose State played a real ball game, coming down to Tuscaloosa and giving Alabama everything they could bargain for. Ultimately, Alabama did win this game, 31-28, but you still can't feel good if you're a Crimson Tide fan, losing 2 games and nearly losing to San Jose State. Nonetheless, a win is a win, so I guess you can't get too upset. And Troy Davenport did play really well, although, again, they just refused to use their running backs. Troy Davenport is literally the entire offense. Got to give the Spartans credit for making it a game, though. The final game of the day, we've got Kentucky facing off against number 1 Oklahoma. The Sooners have been atop the polls all episode, and with how this college football season has gone, we can't let that stay, right? Well, Kentucky seems to agree. The Wildcats offense put on a show here in Norman. Levine Adamson, the senior quarterback and potential high NFL draft pick, played really well. Kentucky would get the upset over Oklahoma by 3 possessions, 48-31. Being your final score, the Wildcats are now ranked, while Oklahoma falls right back to number 10, where they started at the beginning of the year. You may notice Oklahoma has a new quarterback, freshman Salvador Lockwood. Their starter, Deacon Adderley, is out for 7 weeks. Again, another team whose season is being ravaged by their quarterback getting hurt, which is pretty unfortunate. I like Salvador Lockwood. He was a 5-star recruit, but he looked overmatched today against Kentucky. Levine Adamson, meanwhile, threw for 4 touchdowns. He ran for 2 more. A great win for Kentucky, who is now ranked at number 19. Taking a look at some other scores, Cal with a nice win over BYU. Navy takes care of Air Force. North Carolina gets back on the win column as they beat Virginia. Wisconsin is ranked once again. They beat Indiana. The Badgers 5-1 on the year. Middle Tennessee State scores 63. Michigan State wins by just 3. USC and Florida State win their games. They are now number 1 and number 2 in the country. Let's take a look at some other scores. Ole Miss loses to Georgia State right after beating Alabama. On brand. Missouri's undefeated. They defeat TCU. Good win for the Tigers. FAU loses to UAB after their big upset. Syracuse defeats Duke after Duke finally won a game last week. Arkansas beats South Carolina. Maybe we should be worried about South Carolina. A team we really should be worried about is Idaho. They lost by 30 against Arizona State. Boise State beats Arizona. Good win for Army. Good win for UCF. Cincinnati defeats Minnesota. And that just about does it. So there's going to be a lot of movement here in the polls because we had some big upsets. Florida State, USC, Cal, Notre Dame, and Virginia Tech is your top 5. You got undefeated Auburn in there as well. Previously number 1 Oklahoma drops all the way to number 10. I feel like that's kind of harsh for them. I get that they played poorly, but they've been so good this year. Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas Tech, and South Alabama are now all ranked. Georgia, Miami, Michigan, and South Carolina drop out. Troy Davenport is still the Heisman leader. I don't know why. Levine Adamson out of nowhere jumps up to 2 with Tate, Myers, and Amari August in the top 5. Where the hell is Puma Whitlock? That makes no sense to me. He just dominated against Iowa. Players of the week, Javon Davidson, who had 9 TFLs for Miami of Ohio, who lost 27-0. And then Jari Evans, the quarterback out of Memphis, scored 7 times, propelling the Tigers to the win. So let's take a look here at Week 7. I'm very excited about the Red River rivalry between Oklahoma and Texas. Oklahoma has beaten Texas all 3 times in this series. Both teams are coming off of losses and need wins. LSU, Florida could be interesting. Virginia Tech, UNC will be interesting. I want to see what the Hokies are made of. Michigan State and Ohio State, there's going to be a lot of points there. Georgia and Alabama, must win for both teams. Whoever loses that game, I think their season's basically over. Going into Week 8, Idaho, Cal is interesting, as is Clemson and Navy. The midshipmen have been good so far. Oregon, Iowa is a pretty good game. Virginia Tech and Miami, the Hokies are really being tested. Notre Dame and USC might be the game of the year. Both of these teams are undefeated, they look great, and they play in the same division. Florida State with a tough test against a pretty good Rutgers team who's been a lot better than last year. FSU then plays against Navy in Week 9. We've got Arizona against Washington, Oklahoma and Auburn. That's going to be a really good game if Auburn is still playing at the level that they are. Duke and Middle Tennessee State, rematch of a college football playoff game last year. Obviously, Duke kind of sucks now. Texas TCU. Texas Tech is now ranked. They play LSU. Tennessee and Alabama. That's a must-win game for both teams. And then Rutgers, we'll see if they can get an upset over Clemson. So that'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.